Welcome, gamers and game curious, to another episode of RPG Obsession, the show where passion meets inspiration. I'm your host, Spike Murphy Rose, and on this episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive with author and game designer Alison Cybe. Let's get right into it. Hey, everybody. We are sitting down with Alison Cybe, author and game designer here. You may be familiar with some of Alison's past work on the Fallout and Dishonored RPGs, as well as a number of publications. Correct?
Yes, indeed. I have worked on the GM chapter of the Fallout roleplay game, and I have made an adventure for Dishonored and a couple of adventures for Starfinder with Paizo, which was so much fun.
Yes, that was what I was going to mention next, as well as you've written for the World of Darkness, for Vampire the Masquerade specifically, and have also had a couple of novels and novelettes out as well. Most recently, Realms of Valoron, which through March, all the author royalties are being donated to support relief efforts in Ukraine. And earlier, you had also written I Was a Gay Teenage Zombie, which is a novelette, correct?
Yes, that is getting on in years, that one. But yeah, that one is out. The current one, Realms of Valoron, is my newest novel. My royalties as of the month of March are being donated to help support charity in Ukraine.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know you've been working on Realms of Valorant for a while. So why don't we start by delving into that, because that does touch on a couple of different, I think, themes that have been there throughout your career as a writer and in game writing as well. But what can you tell us? What's the basic the elevator pitch of Realms of Valorant first, just for those who aren't familiar with it?
It's a fairly interesting little novel. I mean, I would say that I wrote it myself. It follows the journey of a fairly new cleric who has stepped into the world of Valorant, which is the hottest and most exciting video MMO RPG currently on the market. I believe they call it a lit RPG these days. I'm not too sure. I recently heard the term isekai, which is a term I had not heard until recently. I looked it up and I realized, oh, that would refer to about 95% of the things I watched while I was growing up as well. So yeah. Yeah,
I
and
would have thought it was a TikTok dance if you just said that without any context.
yeah,
So
so no idea what that meant until I was about halfway through writing the book, and it follows his adventures in making new friends and learning about the people he runs into, facing inter-guild drama, that kind of thing. It is. If I was to try to sell it, I would describe it as a side-splittingly funny, epic fantasy comedy set in an MMORPG environment, detailing the lives of an eclectic group of characters and learning about the people behind the keyboards. But I'm not here to sell it for you. I
this is
only
what
write, I only write the damn things.
bridging that gap between the creatives and then the marketing side of actually selling the art that people create, that's a fine balancing act, and one that I don't think anyone's perfectly nailed it. So that actually does get back to something I noticed is a theme with a lot of your work, is that it does seem to touch on a lot of different, I guess, genres or mediums that exist within kind of the overall gaming and fantasy scene. Realms of Valorant isn't just about a fantasy adventure, but it also is about, they're playing a video game of a fantasy adventure. It is
Yeah.
really getting into the meta, the gaming culture there.
Mm.
And just going over some of the games that you've worked on, it looking at Fallout, which of course is a very storied computer RPG franchise. Dishonored, which also was when it came out, was a big entry into the video game RPG genre. And even, well, it's not a video game, but you contributed to the Stargate RPG as well, correct?
Yes, yeah, I have contributed 3 adventures for the D20 Stargate roleplay game Living campaign, which, depending on when this goes out, should be either up and available now or within the very near future.
Probably available now, but maybe I'll get to I'll edit this faster than I anticipate. But I'm seeing that crossover, that connection there where,
Mm.
you have been working on things that kind of speak to that, I guess, that bridging of the different mediums of these taking franchises from one medium into another, as it were. Is that something that you have consciously pursued? Or has it been more that you followed your interest and those have been your interests?
I'd say it's probably closer to where my interests lie. I tend to be quite deconstructionist when it comes to media. I like to look at how things are put together and really play with a lot of the different ideas that they raise. I kind of struggle to stay in one genre. I like to mix and merge different things. Like if there's horror, I like a little bit of sci-fi in it. If there's fantasy, I might try to put a bit of horror or a bit of sci-fi, because or add some comedy in there. Just kind of mix things together and either try and make something new or give it a new different kind of twist to it. That's one of the things that I particularly enjoy doing.
Is that something that that has always been part of your experience, with gaming? Is remixing the things, the franchises or the games that you're the properties that you're interested in? Or is that something that came, over time as you were getting deeper into these things and starting to experiment with them more?
I think that's yeah, that would be something which I've kind of picked up more as I've experimented, with them over the years. It's definitely the more I've learned and experienced with it, the more I've kind of got a bit of a grasp on them, and I kind of from there I start to think, what else can we do with that? How can we subvert or change or just kind of play around with it and have a bit of fun, you know?
Hmm,
It,
it makes sense. I mean, just like as you get more comfortable with things, you feel more comfortable using them or changing them. I
mm,
know that for me personally, for instance, it's still a struggle to contradict established lore if I'm playing in a campaign setting for an RPG or something like that. Like there's that part of me that wants to do things right, stick to the way things are written, and it's hard at times to just be like, "No, like, this is our story. Who cares what the canon in the Star Wars extended universe is," or something like that.
yeah, yeah. Always, if it helps, I always like to give people permission to do that, to kind of to change what works for you to change in a game, or to kind of use as much of kind of a built forum, kind of like to have someone construct a sandbox for you to play in. That's something I particularly enjoy. Good example would be, I think it was about a year ago. I did a Gaslight era Call of Cthulhu game for Stygian Fox, which is available now. I will find a link that you might be able to pop into like a text channel for anyone who wants it. The first part of it starts off as a Holmesian adventure, a bit of a mystery for you to solve. And in the second act, very quickly segues into a kind of pseudo classic haunted house atmosphere with a bit of a sci-fi twist. So it's just the really, you can get whatever feel that you want with your games, and you want to remember that they're your games, and you can essentially do whatever you like with them. So you can definitely go as strong into the built sandbox that you have, play with what is provided for you, or build your own, and both of those are valid, very very valid options, definitely.
Mhm. Though, I think that it can be a struggle for some DMs, and even players too, when presenting their own takes on things or their ideas in a game, whether it's on a setting or a specific character type or even a trope or something like that. Because we all worry about the judgment of our peers to one degree
Mm.
or another. And that's is certainly something that I know I have both like been victim of, and when I was younger, was guilty of being that type of gatekeeper to other people of
Mm.
like, "Oh, why are you doing a character like that?" Or "That's a dumb idea," or something along those lines. And so I think that's something that a lot of people worry about is when playing, because when you're showing something that you have made rather than something that someone else did, I think there's a vulnerability to that. You're showing a part of yourself. Or at least that's how I feel. I mean, I don't know if that's resonates with you at all.
I think it does. Yeah, yeah. I think it definitely does, and I think anyone who kind of works in a creative field. I mean, making games is a creative medium. Running and GMing games is inherently creative. I think you put a lot of yourself out there. So yeah, I definitely get that as well. Yeah.
So where I'm curious where it started. Like, was there a magic moment for you that really made either like fantasy or sci-fi and horror or gaming like click for you? Where you remember like, wow, this is where I got hooked, or this is where it happened, or was it more of a was there not a moment like that? Was it just kind of an accumulation of interest that just all seemed kind of natural until it's like, oh, hey, I'm a nerd.
Oh goodness, that is such a hard question. That is a really
Hmm.
really hard question. I think I've always kind of had that kind of interest ever since I was a young thing, if I'm honest.
Well, I
Definitely.
remember an old Transformers comic book when I was a kid that had an ad for Dungeons and Dragons in it. Up until that point, I was still into all kinds of like fantasy, sci-fi, nerdy stuff, but that was the moment I remember like, what is that?
Mm,
Like, I need to know more about this.
mm.
You can blame that on the Jeff Easley red dragon that was roaring out of that ad too, but at the same time, like I said, like I already was immersed and just loved all this stuff. I could name every transformer and every dinosaur that ever existed. I remember that ad that I saw in a comic book, and then years later, finally getting to play Tunnels and Trolls. Actually, was the first like TTRPG that I got to play.
Yeah.
So so what was your journey to your first RPG experience specifically? Whether in like a video game or like a TTRPG experience?
I think if I go back far enough, I would have to lay the blame, if I may, on Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston, two gentlemen who in the UK founded a company called Games Workshop.
Hmm,
But long before that, back in the halcyon days, before they did so, they began to publish a series of books called Fighting Fantasy, of which
mhm.
they have over the years amassed basically the entire collection and still have a copy of to this day. They are very similar to the Choose Your Own Adventure book that people in the States would probably recognize, with the addition of rudimentary roleplay game mechanics. So you would have monsters and you would roll dice to fight them, and that would pretty much be the first entryway into the TTRPG formula and format for myself. Yes.
Well, it's easy to see why, because those books always had very compelling covers. I'm a fan of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, too, and locally where I grew up, you could call, like, an 800 number where they had, like, a Choose Your Own Adventure line, and, of course, they'd start
Oh yeah.
charging you, like, an arm and a leg after you did it for more than a few minutes, so I would just call over and over, just doing the first couple minutes that were free. So this is the same Steve Jackson of, like, Steve Jackson Games and GURPS?
No, that's a
Okay.
different Steve Jackson. Although that Steve Jackson who you're referencing there did write, I think it was one or possibly two of the books. I know that, and I know this from having spoken to the Steve Jackson. We would refer to him as Steve Jackson UK and Steve Jackson US. I spoke
Mhm.
to Steve Jackson UK a couple of years back, and they both met and were fairly surprised, if I remember right, that they both shared the same name at the time. So that was yeah, that was interesting, but yeah, different Steve Jackson from Steve Jackson Games. Probably find out which of the books Steve Jackson US wrote. I know he wrote Scorpion Swamp, which I think was the eighth of the Fighting Fantasy books.
Oh man,
Um,
that's just a hilarious troll there, basically.
yes,
'Cause oh no, this fighting fantasy book's written by a new author, Steve Jackson, as
yes, it
opposed to the
is.
old author, Steve Jackson.
It is definitely a bit strange. Yes, I will tell you if it helps. I am working on a podcast about the Fighting Fantasy books with a friend of mine, Stuart Lloyd, which will be coming out at some point this year. So do keep your eyes peeled.
That's fantastic.
It looks like, from what I'm able to find, the Steve Jackson US, the chap from who's done the GURPS ones, wrote three of the Fighting Fantasy books: Scorpion Swamp, Demons of the Deep, and Robot Commando, which is about robots
Hmm.
fighting dinosaurs.
Oh well, I mean,
It's
that
been
does sound like classic GURPS there, but then again, GURPS is GURPS is anything it wants to be. So
yes, it is very fun.
oh, man, and so the Fighting Fantasy books, these I'm familiar with also, I think it was Fabled Lands, which was, I think, a more recent version, but I've seen that popping up on Steam as well, and I know the Fighting Fantasy books, a couple of them got a, like, computer/video game adaptation, didn't they?
Yes, yes. There are quite a few video game versions of them as well, and I know that they have done like straight adaptations of them in ebook format, kind of like as a digital ebook app that you can play as well. So
Oh,
those
okay.
might be worth looking at as well.
I hope, yeah. I've always enjoyed those kind of choose your own adventure type of games. They feel like, uh, they give you that narrative, at least for me.
Mm,
They give you that narrative experience that normally I think a game master provides in a game that is hard to get out of a video game or any kind of emulation
yeah,
that's going on, because it's about like stringing those events together. And of course, the choose your own adventure, you're kind of you're basically on rails, even if you have like choices that you get to make. But it's good at creating that illusion of that narrative element that I think the DM normally provides to all the kind of math and outcomes that make up most
mm.
RPGs. So how did, from fighting fantasy books, when did that move to, or what was the first like move to true TTRPGs from there?
Like most people, my gateway would probably be Dungeons and Dragons.
Which edition?
That would be, I believe it was second edition at the time. I had bugged my parents for a while to pick up a box. It did come in boxes. It was, I believe it was described as the black box, which was that one was shaped like a board game. I remember because we picked it up at a shop, a toy shop. This would
Mm,
be during their big push in the late 80s, early 90s, back when TSR was still there, and
mhm,
they would have a board game style box with big black box with a red dragon on the front.
mhm. That same red dragon, that was the
That's the
one that was
one.
used for all, it was the ads for that I was
Yep,
seeing in comics as a kid, yeah, and that was, I
exact one.
think I think if I remember correctly, it's a version of the kinda Beck Me BX
Mm,
D&D that, because I think they re-released it when they had the classic D&D box set that was in more that kind of beige, like, light pink orange color. I think it was the same rule set as in there, and most of the same components too, little paper minis and stuff like that,
that's the
but
one. Yeah.
oh, man, I get nostalgic just thinking about, I love that, like, e every time I get a Kickstarter for a new board game or something, that's part of, like, it brings me back to opening up the box set and getting, here's the dungeon map, and here's the adventures, and the guide, and the character cards, and oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very susceptible to things.
That one was a lovely way in because, as I remember right, if I remember, they had the rules kind of delivered piecemeal, one piece by piece over a variety of like cards, and the cards you would go through. They were like kind of like each new piece of the rules would kind of introduce a new like part of the adventure that you would play through. If I'm remembering that right, I mean that's a long time ago.
But I think that's accurate, and that speaks to definitely how they had been presenting the games at that time. It's something I've ranted about that before on another podcast actually, but about that process that the original like beginner, expert, companion, master, and immortal sets how they introduced portions of the rules to you through adventures and through each release, and were kind of representing like how your not just your character was growing in the game and how that was opening up options for them, but how presumably how you approach the game as a player was advancing as you were playing more and getting deeper into it and had played a character in the game for longer and therefore had they were assuming a that you were going on a journey that would lead you through that. And I think that's something that in game design kind of almost got lost for a little while, and that has been a strength of Paizo's in particular with the way they have presented, like, well, Pathfinder initially, but even more so with Pathfinder Second Edition and Starfinder, where they
Mm.
started that, and it seemed to be a big focus on presentation and on how people are going to learn the game and interact with it beyond just here's a codex of all the rules, but really thinking in terms of how are people going to use this? What are quality of life things that can be put into this? That you've written for Paizo and written for Starfinder. Is that something that you've seen or that appealed to you there as well? Or
I definitely felt that was one of the big things that appealed to me when kind of getting into it. I got into Starfinder just before I did Pathfinder, about a year before Second Edition came out. So I'm still
Mhm.
fairly new to the Pathfinder Starfinder ones. I say that it's been about 5 years now. Oh God, where is the
Well,
time gone?
5e D&D is still new to me, and it's been let's it's been what, like 7, 8 years now since it
Oh,
came out?
that's so depressing. But no, no. Just getting on board with the Starfinder and Pathfinder games, they present all of that information really well, put across just just in a way that onboards the players in such an organic manner. I think that's something that's very important. I think just feeling that there is a natural way to come into a game it's huge, especially when like there's a lot of games competing for shelf
Mhm,
space out there.
mhm. And let's being fair about it, Starfinder is a crunchier system. It has more rules and mechanics in it than certainly than 5e Dungeons and Dragons, and some other systems out there like Savage Worlds and Fate come to mind as ones that definitely have more streamlined rule sets, and that can be intimidating to people. So I think that that onboarding is really important there, and
Yeah,
is something they have to be more concerned with because everyone for the past 22 years, everyone has basically taken D&D and D20 mechanics and knowing how that works for granted, and it definitely makes it interesting, at least from what I've seen, when you're introducing people to other systems, even if they're similar, how much of an impact that has compared to when I was growing like, when I was getting into gaming during the '80s and '90s, and I don't know if it was the same for you, but people were much more broad in the games that they played.
yeah,
It wasn't like it is now where D&D was king. None of the popular kids played D&D when I was getting into gaming.
yeah,
They were all playing World of Darkness or Fading Suns or Ars Magica or
mhm,
just endless. There were lots of new games coming out that had new mechanics and weren't D&D and weren't levels and classes and were breaking the mold and kind of leaving that old way of behind. It was anachronistic. And then third edition came out. And that was and D&D was the only game in town again.
yeah.
Uh,
They have definitely secured the top echelons on the market share, haven't they?
though it's interesting. I was looking through Roll20. They do their annual or quarterly actually reports on what games people are playing and what people are running. Like it's the closest that we get to any kind of meaningful dissection of the gaming community and what we're playing out there. And at first, it struck me at just how low the percentage was of total games being played for other games besides D&D 5e. But what I realized looking back over the years was that these games had like Starfinder and Pathfinder, they've not been losing players. They've actually been continuing to grow and get more popular. It's just that D&D 5e went from being a small percentage of 9 or
Yeah,
10% the first couple of years that it came out to now is like 75% of games. And it's not because the numbers shrank from everyone else, it's because D&D 5e added hundreds of thousands of new players.
Yeah.
Just tons of people came into it. So it's interesting. And so for you, as someone who has been involved with gaming longer, is that something that you kind of noticed when there was a big influx of new gamers, and did it change your perspective at all on the things that you were working on and how you were writing or who you were writing to?
Oh God. It is something that I am still struggling to come to terms with, if I'm totally honest with you. I'm very much very much still writing for the more eclectic kind of audience. I for about a decade and a half really kind of got densely into Call of Cthulhu as my main go-to game, and it is very much my still my go-to for investigative horror kind of games. So I write very much for that whenever I have the chance. I don't do as much for D&D or D20 as I probably should, if I'm honest with you. If I was a better writer, I would probably try and get some stuff up on the DM's Guild. But I can honestly say I'm not. I write what I what I know and what I'm kind of familiar with, and
Mhm.
kind of play on those in those sandboxes. Really, if I'm honest with
Well, and I don't think it's a mistake that you've been doing that because, I know that Modiphius's recent batch of games that have come out using their 2D20 system have really seemed to hit their stride and
you.
have looking at those same Roll20 reports, they have been making major gains over the past couple of years
Yeah.
with their first game that seemed to really up there. For those who aren't familiar, Modiphius is a publishing company. They have a signature 2D20 system that they use. It is not like D&D's D20 system. It's a roll under system. It has a very different set of mechanics. For the longest time, it's been associated with a Mutant Warzone, which was a storied franchise that I've loved since I was a kid. But it was really with the Star Trek Adventures game, which has been
Mm.
growing in popularity more and more, and then more recently Dune, and then of course the Fallout RPG that you worked on uses that 2D20 system as well. And all of these have been really making a big impression and expanding what the company or the expanding the company's reach, getting and more people are playing these games now too.
Yeah.
And in particular, I know what stood out for me with reading I read through Dune and the Fallout RPG basically back to back since they came out so close together. And even though at their heart they use the same system, they are completely different games. And the way the system is implemented, like, feels very different. It does not feel like I'm playing the same game, and in a good way. They
Mm.
feel like they have their own unique interpretations to that.
Really have, yeah. They have their 2D20 system, and the flexibility that allows is just fantastic. They can fit that to so many different styles of play. Definitely.
Right. And what stood out so much about the systems too was that they're very much written toward being used. Like when you're reading through the GM section, it is all for both game systems was all about giving you tools to be able to just get going and start running the game and feel comfortable and being able to like here's how you generate an adventure that's going to feel like this genre and this
Mm.
game and that speaks to these things. And obviously you didn't have an influence on how that was presented in the Dune game, but in the Fallout RPG, like, that was, like, very much stood out was, in particular, how it felt like the game could almost run itself with the way, like, the information was presented and how well the GM section and the GM toolkit were laid out. It's like, wow, like, you really what you only need the GM to fill in the narrative parts here. You could just go with this and be able to generate an adventure yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to make that as easy for new GMs to pick up and play with as possible. You get a lot of new GMs coming into every game, and there would have once been a time when you would have roleplay games, almost like all of them. They would start with the what is the roleplay game section at the front.
Mhm.
Because like you were aware that every game might be the someone's first game, and I wanted the GMing section of this one to kind of to be like just as useful for a new player as possible.
Well, and I think that's something that's very hard to capture because it's not just about presenting information, but it's
Mhm.
presenting it in a way that's easy to use, that makes people feel comfortable with it, and it's not overwhelming them with it. Like if you go back to second or third edition D&D Forgotten Realms stuff, which I absolutely love, but it's also like literally reading a history textbook essentially. And that does not make it easy to run, not in the way that with the Fallout game, you can just flip open to, the page relevant to whatever it is you're looking up, and it'll have stuff that you can use right then and there
Yeah.
that you're in the middle of a game and you could just do a quick reference or a roll on a chart and be ready to go. So what was when designing that, when writing that, how did you translate that from the source material, from when you're working from a video game? Because like you're saying, like everyone coming into a game knows how to be a player. So even if it's a new game, it's a new for you're playing the Fallout RPG for the first time, you still may be like, well, I know Fallout, like I've played Fallout, I know how to be a player in a Fallout game, but nobody knows how to be the DM for a Fallout game or a Skyrim game or something like that because that's always handled by the computer. And obviously, there's certain principles that carry across, but I imagine you're having to consider how do you not just run this game, but run it so that it feels like the source material. So I guess what did you look to for inspiration? What was your process for that? Like, how did you try to capture that?
So for an example of that, if I can ask, what would you say is the core gameplay loop for when you're playing Fallout? Yourself, what would you say is the core gameplay loop?
Exploration
Hmm.
and meaningful choices.
Yep, yep. That is the core elements that we look at when we're bringing that into the TTRPG format. You have meaningful, important choices, which is something that I flag up in the chapter, and every quest that you have like a character, can be a character that you can get a quest from anywhere. That's your mission, what you're doing, what is sending you out there into the world. That could be an NPC that you're speaking to. It could be a document that you find tucked in a drawer somewhere. Whatever it is the impetus for getting the player characters out into the world. From there, they go from location A to location B. There is travel, exploration. There is movement from venue A to venue B. I'm repeating myself there, but you can also have repetition in your game as well. You
Mhm.
go to multiple different locations. You do whatever is going to happen at that location. Kill a monster, retrieve an item, work a piece of machinery, do a scan, help someone. You do X, your quest objective. And then you have decision that has to be made, which will have an impact on the end result. That could be like a twist in the narrative, turning the tail, just like whatever it is. Perhaps something happens along the way, like the mission doesn't quite go according to plan. It can be absolutely anything. The
Mhm.
core thing that you're illustrating to the reader, who's going to be picking up the book and learning how to GM, is to make them look at what the core gameplay loop they're going to be investing in. If they can understand what gameplay loop
Mhm.
they're going to be running from session to session, from adventure to adventure, to composing how their campaign will run, then they can basically take those ideas and create anything with them.
Mm. So
Sorry,
what would you so translate so no, that's great. So what would you say the core gameplay loop of Call of Cthulhu is then, just to contrast it?
that is core gameplay loop for Call of Cthulhu is basically the same. It's almost always going to be the same. you receive moment, a decision, an object, a person, whatever it is that sets an impetus in the characters in order to travel to such and such area, interact with other characters. They all follow what is essentially the hero's journey, Campbell's hero's journey, but derived into a more structured and formula based like methodology there. It's
Well,
where you as the GM can once you've got a firm idea of that is where you as a GM can go in and start changing things around.
I
You can like interrupt the flow of how that hero's journey goes. You can throw in a few loose ends or a couple of red herrings. Make it a more investigative type of game. Kind of lead them down one path and then surprise them with something else. Really, once you kind of get that, the whole world's your oyster. Really.
I guess though with Campbell's hero's journey, the hero usually ends up coming home. In
Yeah.
Call of
Well,
Cthulhu, that's
well, we
that's
can
like
we can hope.
like meaningful choices. I was like, well, I mean, a lot of those choices are like your existence is futile, but you get the choice to make things slightly less bad.
I mean,
Usually through some great sacrifice.
Yeah. I mean, you have a choice in Call of Cthulhu. It's do you die or do you go crazy,
Right, right.
or
But
both?
it's like that, and that's a choice that you make at character creation. You're just like, did my character do they speak other languages? Like, if
Mm.
do I speak a dead language? Okay, I'm going to be the one going crazy.
Oh yeah.
When you're playing a computer and video games, do you find yourself kind of dissecting their structure from that kind of game design perspective as well, thinking about like what the loops that they're putting you on? Do you start picking it apart and even like thinking about how you would implement that in the TTRPGs that you play and run?
No, I just get carried away with them. I honestly don't think about it. If you're playing a game, I find that I don't think about them either. When I'm writing it, I get into kind of a design headspace. No, that's not the case. No, before I write it, I get into a design headspace. When I'm writing it, I kind of move beyond that and get into a writing headspace.
Yeah.
Yes, and then when I'm playing them, it's completely different headspace. There, I'm just playing it. It's weird. I just get carried away with whatever I'm working on. I don't know. I could be
Mhm.
just completely wrong on all of this.
Well, I mean, you're published, your work is popular, so you're certainly on the right track with it, at least some of it.
Mm,
And I've found that I'm much the same. Like I just get very focused with what I'm doing in the games, but sometimes I have those moments where I pull back and I might think about I'm playing Valheim with my wife, and I'm trying to think about like how would I do this in an RPG? But it's like this would just be really boring if I were doing this on a tabletop RPG. Even as a board game, unless it had little fun little tokens, it would be boring.
mm,
But it's
mm.
stuff I do think about. Though I remember playing through Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I started taking notes sometimes on some just like the random events that would
Yeah.
happen when you're traveling through the countryside and that because there were some of those like, man, like I want this in my game
Mm,
specifically because they're just little vignettes. Like they just show you something about the world. It's not connected to a quest. It's not on any map marker or anything like that. Those types of things that I find as a DM, I tend to forget or rush past, like adding to my games because I want to get to the combat or the adventure location or the big NPC scene or whatever it is. So is that something when you're writing and translating games like video games to the TTRPG space, is that something that you're looking at? Like, what are the types of things in the game that they use to do the world building? How do we translate that into the tabletop experience? Like in Fallout, which is of course known for all the random stuff you can find in every direction that tells
mm.
some story about the world.
Oh god, I could never write all of that into an adventure. And if you're GMing something, that's the kind of thing that you have permission to add into your games. Definitely do, because whenever you're writing an adventure, you are putting across essentially the skeleton of what people what you want to bring onto the table. Your GM is going to fill out the muscles and the skin and everything else on that. And I say that not to say that this should be a job for the GM. It's a joy to do that. It's something that so many GMs will, as they grow in confidence and experience, just start doing by default. I mean, you'll have done the same thing whenever a player says, "I want to do this," or something unexpected happens. Like you will just go, "Oh yes, yes, I like that," and this
Mhm.
happens, and
Mhm.
something else happens, and you just kind of instinctively start to add on more and more improvisation into your games, and that's where I'd say a lot of that comes from. Like if I haven't had the chance to put together a specific like adventure for our local club, I will
Mhm.
just improvise something, and I've got like a little techniques to doing that. Like I will just kind of on the walk to the pub where we play, I will think of like okay, what are three scenes I want to have in this
Mhm.
adventure, and I have like written adventures for a couple of companies based entirely on just pieces that I've improvised at our local club, which I only had like three small scenes or like moments just as ideas when I sat down at the table and went, okay, so just we'll just begin and we'll see how it goes. And that's yeah, you can have a lot of fun with that. I would definitely recommend anyone who really wants to bring their GMing to another level to take couple classes on improv skills, theaters, or just watch a couple episodes of Whose Line Is It Anyway? That's all
Mhm.
as well. Yeah,
And
there's
do
nothing I can
you?
teach you.
I mean, yeah, yes, and is very much something that's been embraced. You know, a big part of improv is yes anding, and there's
Mm,
something that's been I've seen embraced and talked about more and more in RPG discussions, especially over the past I wanna say a few years, but really the past decade, but as I feel like as gaming has grown and there's been that space to take a more introspective look at it, I mean, we have gaming scholars now. There are books being written on the history of
yeah,
gaming that are presenting conflicting views on the history on gaming. There are people who professionally are scholars of not just gaming, like, real world history, but of the in-game lore of these game worlds that have been created too. So, and I've seen there's been a lot more reflection on, I guess, gaming as an art form that seems to have come with that, and with the whole genre just or the whole space, I should say, just opening up more and more.
yeah.
Do you find when you're having to improvise that having random charts or something to reference or roll on or just glance at, is that something that you find helpful or that you like to use personally?
Not personally, no, no. I know that a lot of people can, and that's cool. That's cool. I haven't done myself, but yeah, yeah. It's all good. Whatever the individual feels is best is definitely one to go for, and highly recommend.
So, switching gears here. No, but this actually does like tie into all of this because now your latest project and has been officially announced from Mongoose Publishing is Shield Maidens.
Mm,
So this is a TTRPG and you are the lead writer on it, correct?
yeah.
Yeah. So the whole shebang. So, has your approach to this been different from projects you've worked on previously? Have there been things you have been able to do differently or make decisions on that you weren't in your past roles, just contributing to books rather than being the lead writer, rather than being the one that's generating the core content? Uh,
It's been a lot bigger than any of the projects I've worked on thus far. And oh god, yeah, the first part that we kind of worked on was world building, which is a lot of fun. I did world building with Sanguine Publications for their game A Bit, which should be out very soon. That is a supernatural action game where the
ooh.
players lead a group of supernaturally inclined hunters and renegades to track down cultists and supernatural monsters in a world where magic is very real and fuses with technology in terrifying ways. Yeah, some of the things I did with Abyss, I brought into Shield Maidens. I am of the philosophy that people buy games to make adventures with them. So when you're building a world, you should have a lot of hooks, avenues,
Mm.
and space for people to kind of bring their own ideas into. So I've tried to create as much of that as humanly possible. And the nice thing with Shield Maidens is that you have 9 worlds essentially to do that
Mhm.
in.
So, what have you been looking have you been looking at any source material for this? Like, obviously, there's, a Nor heavy Norse overtones to it, but this is not meant to be a true to life reproduction of the Norse gods or, extrapolation of Norse culture. So, where have you been looking as inspiration sources?
We start with the Norse mythology, and then interjected as much cyberpunk as we could, and really kind of put them both into the pot and mixed them until they became quite indistinct. I wanted them to have the style and impression of them not really being Viking with cyberpunk on top, but being like a big mix of them both, where they were kind of eventually became indistinct. I really liked that, and kind of yeah, kind of wanted to get to that kind of point. So yeah. Yeah, I started my research with Norse mythology. Yeah, I mean I've read a lot about mythology in general. One of my pet projects, like fondnesses is in old Celtic mythology, Irish myths, and so on. So I picked up a lot of Nordic, Scandinavian lore, even before going into this one. Read a lot more to kind of like bring myself a good wealth of information, and then just thought, okay, and so how can I bring that several hundreds and thousands of years into the future, into a kind of post cyberpunk setting, kind of a feel for it.
Mhm. Now, it's hard to think of that without thinking back to, of course, Marvel Comics's portrayal of the Asgardians as
Mm.
these hyper advanced, technologically advanced representations of the Norse gods. Is that something that you had looked to, like, at all, even just for like the artistic feel for this? I was looking at some of the old Jack Kirby and Stan Lee stuff, or Walt Simonson had a storied run that most of this stuff that we're seeing in the movies all came from in his comics,
Mm.
but also was one of the first to really try to adapt more of the actual Norse mythology into the comics after the more kind of like surface level,
Yeah.
I guess, interpretation that it had originally been. Is that like, so were comics or other like popular media, were any of those sources that you looked at or that you referenced for this or tried to at least like speak to in some way?
Yeah, there are thousands of like ideas and interpretations. There's an expression, there is no new art,
Mm,
which basically for anyone who's not the it essentially means that all ideas are kind of built on the backbone of other ideas and interpretations, and that is definitely true with really anything that's made nowadays.
mm,
The challenge for anyone in a creative field is taking those ideas which exist, like with all of the influences. I mean, I think some of the biggest influences we had was well we have vibes of the Marvel gods cropping up here and there. We have influences taken from material like Neuromancer, which is one of my favorite
mhm.
books.
Oh my god, yes.
Absolutely loved that influence, even ranging from things like Akira. You will notice little vibes here and there kind of cropping in from all of those influences. The real challenge that I've tried to set myself is to frame them and interpret them and give everything a fresh and very distinctive spin. And hopefully, we've been able to capture that.
Well, and that actually speaks to another question I'd had about this, and going more to the cyberpunk side of things and that inspiration. So one thing that has marked or marred the cyberpunk genre for a long time is the sexism that is frequently associated with it and presented in a lot of the cyberpunk genre. And there's also been that fetishization of Asian cultures usually in cyberpunk, but that
Yeah.
that adaptation of including cultures really just to be to again to fetishize them, to just be like, oh, look at this exotic culture and we've made it all neon now. And Shield Maiden seems to very clearly be parting ways from those tropes that have been present in the cyberpunk genre. So I guess, is that something that you were conscious of? Is that something that you tried to speak to? And if so, where were you looking as examples of how to capture that cyberpunk feel, for instance, without having to have the disenfranchisement of women or people of color or the LGBTQ community that is so frequently used to as a shorthand for showing us how dystopian and authoritarian the world is.
The main core concept of cyberpunk is very much entrenched in both the fusion of the cybernetic, of the potential transhumanist elements, offering humanity a more progressive and better idea, clashing against the post-capitalist kind of political landscape. None of that is anything that hinges on certain like sexist or like
Mhm.
Asian like fetishizing concepts. So we've been able to kind of take the core philosophical elements of cyberpunk while hopefully leaving as much of the negative baggage behind. And I think well, I mean, I've done my best to hopefully do so. Hopefully, um, I have to be honest. It was it's kind of positive that I have quite a bit of experience with cyberpunk in general, and
Mhm.
yeah,
And I'm not trying to say that
no, it's a
those negative aspects are
very good
inherent to cyberpunk.
question. No, it's a very good question. It's just that it's quite a tricky one as well, isn't it? It's like
Mhm.
how do you essentially rip out the tricky elements that are kind of common in a genre? And I
Well,
suppose a lot of that is just kind of boiling the genre back down to its core basic elements. What is
mhm.
the philosophical core of it? And that's the cyber and the punk, what
Right.
the genre's named after, really.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you hit it on the head. The themes in cyberpunk are about that clash between transhumanism and humanity advancing, and that post-capitalist or late stage capitalism, that entrenchment that's there, and the authoritarian political status quo that seems to inherently create.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, we've also seen the Cyber Blade Runner 2049. We have a giant naked holographic woman that's there, and in this again, a everything looks like it's supposed to be a slightly more cyber Hong Kong, and it doesn't need that to tell the story that's in there, and yet too many people associate these things as being staples of that genre, and it can be I feel like it can be hard to separate when you look at the pushback that happens in v Call of the Cthulhu with, like, H.P. Lovecraft fans, because
yeah,
H.P. Lovecraft was so problematic, but at the same time, like, there has been this work that's been going on really over the past few years to kind of dissect that and separate the genre and what was created there versus, like, his own individual work and biases, and, decoupling that. And in D&D, I mean, same thing with orcs and the portrayal of dark elves and a lot of other either, like, ethnic minorities that have been present in games, or fantasy races that have been coded to represent ethnic minorities that are in games.
mhm,
And for those who don't know, uh, J.R.R. Tolkien said that he based orcs on the worst traits of the Mongoloid people, So
Mhm.
you really and that's his own words, so you really can't argue that there isn't something there as far as the
Yeah.
coding that's been going on. So, you've been a gamer, you've been involved in gaming for a long time, you've been a gamer for a long time. From your perspective, is that something that you've seen happening in the gaming community? Have you been seeing the kind of change and struggles that it's been going through to, I guess, address the sins of the past, as
Mhm.
it were?
Yeah.
Or is that
Yes, 100 times
okay?
yes.
Because some people are like,
Um
"Hey, I haven't seen anything like that," but
I very much personally seen. I would definitely say the community has progressed over the even just the last decade. It really has.
mhm,
Like it has become a lot more open, and I would say some of that is due to the greater visibility of directed towards the hobby, from
mm,
pop culture, people have become more familiar with it, even if it's just via D&D and so on. But there are a lot more minority voices acting as creators in the community
mhm,
now than there ever have been before, which is just absolutely fantastic. I'm just one of them, but I know so many others, and our voices are speaking to those out there who are playing the game, and I'm yeah, I'm so happy that that's having a positive impact on the community. Literally a decade ago, it was not as open as it is now, and anyone
mhm,
who says otherwise, frankly, I'm glad that you've not experienced that
mhm,
difficulty yourself. But trust me, yeah, people have, and it's like significantly more open and more accepting now than it ever has been.
mhm, and if we're gonna put it in the from the perspective of cyberpunk capitalist dystopianism, RPGs are more successful now than they've ever been, so you can't argue against inclusivity from that angle. Was there any voices in the RPG community that stood out to you that caught your eye early on as speaking for the minority, basically for people who weren't like cishet white males in gaming, because that's who has dominated the gaming like writing side of things for a lot of the early decades of gaming. But were there any voices that like caught your eye early on or that stood out to you either
Oh,
as
so
making you
many.
feel seen or okay?
Yeah, so many. Oh god, yeah. There have been like every movement is is slow, and it has kind of built up over the years. I remember, and I've spoken to people who kind of came to the hobby mostly because of like little things that companies would do, like for example, the old classic World of Darkness would kind of presume the female pronoun for the
Mm,
players in their books, and that's like a really small change which had a big impact on the audiences that were
mhm,
coming in. Paizo, for instance, have been making quite a concerted effort to present characters in their games, NPCs, playable characters, options like signature characters who are not of the like the this cisgender heteronormative kind of like
mm,
it's just like one of the reasons I noticed Starfinder in the first case is because one of their signature characters had non-standard they them pronouns, and it's
mm,
little things like that which have collectively added to creating a more open and positive atmosphere throughout the entire community. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it's hard for people who aren't in that who don't feel like they're othered to
Mm,
notice those little things or to appreciate the significance of it, and I've been fortunate. I'm a white male, so a lot of the world is designed to cater to me and look like me. But, I remember noticing with 3rd edition D&D, the fact that the core characters being presented weren't all weren't all male. Some of them were female, and they weren't all white dudes. And
yeah.
that really stood out. And of course, Paizo has made a concerted effort there. And even now in the D&D Essentials box set that kids are learning to play from now, one of the first adventures that they're dealing with focuses around a pair of married male gnome kings.
Hmm.
And I've spoken to Ed Greenwood, and he's lamented all the times when little things like that, little bits of representation were intentionally edited out of RPG works and RPG publications or literature the RPG related books that they were putting out. And, that was all that changes happened in our lifetimes.
Mm.
So it's really amazing to see. The one I wanted to ask, so there's always been, I guess it seems like there's always been an appeal and a draw for kind of the strange between strange horror and a lot of the communities that have felt othered, whether the queer community or people of color or women. Is I guess, do you see is there something that speaks to you that you see as like, "Oh, yeah, this is obvious, like, this is why people get drawn to this." Is that something that you've seen yourself or noticed? I know you worked on the Black Rainbow, right, which was a collection of,
Mm.
queer-themed horror stories, correct?
Yeah, which was fun. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I haven't written as much fiction in the last year because I've been working on games. But yes, yeah. Do you mean like what it is that attracts people of minority groups to TTRPGs specifically?
Well, I was actually yes, but, also, really, it seems like to horror as well, to that kind of strange horror genre within it, whether in fiction or in TTRPGs.
I
'Cause
mean,
I
for the horror genre, a lot of that kind of speaks to the fact that minority groups have to deal with so much of that on our daily basis, and as a result, externalizing a lot of the narratives that we can create kind of can draw from that and tell of the struggles that the characters in the stories might go through in order to progress or overcome a lot of those a lot of those challenges. It's not just throwing characters to a monster if the monster is a personification of your own fears and
Mhm,
anxieties, but it can be. It's very similar to TTRPGs, where a lot of that is just a form of escapism and being able to portray the type of character that you want to be able to portray, but maybe can't necessarily do so for whatever societal
mhm,
reasons or means or so on. Like, for to speak completely bluntly, there are so many trans people who kind of came to terms with that because of exploration through playing characters in tabletop roleplay games. There are people specifically
mhm.
I know obviously personally who can attest to that's kind of where they found their feet, shall we say.
Mhm. Oh, and I interviewed Janelle Jacquez recently, and she had talked about how early on, when she was playing games, she almost exclusively played male characters before she had transitioned because even though she wasn't fully aware of what was going on with herself, there was a part of her that felt like, if I play a female character, people might see something.
Yeah.
And I think that does get back to what we talked about, like, early on at the beginning of this interview, how when you are presenting something to a gaming group, whether a character that you're playing or the adventure that you've designed that you're running as a GM, how you are it's a how you're making yourself vulnerable and you're displaying some of yourself to people, especially when it's something that you have made that isn't like, "Oh, look, I've taken this other thing, this someone else's content, but this is my content."
Mm.
And, there is that I guess that anxiety over what are people going to see?
Yeah.
And I guess I'm kinda just riffing out loud here, but I guess I can pretty easily see how, the genre that, for instance, you look at HP Lovecraft, Cthulhu genre stuff, where a lot of that is about real coming to the realization that existential horror, that the world is a cold and malicious place
Mm.
and doesn't really care about you, and that you're this tiny thing that is just viewed as insignificant by these mighty powers that are taking actions and making decisions that dramatically alter your life without even taking you into concern for it. I suppose I can see how
Yes.
marginalized minorities would relate to that.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think you've very much hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, but I think that's probably one of the reasons why I still enjoy making Call of Cthulhu Adventure, because I like
Mhm.
the idea of creating adventures where characters and players can kind of rail against that.
That's just what I was gonna say. That's one of the things that, for me, always appealed about RPGs was that ability to be a hero, to take a stand, to speak truth to power,
Mm,
and to try and make an impact in these game worlds and these fictional worlds that we can't really have we don't frequently feel like we have that kind of power in our normal lives in the real world. It's a
yeah.
lot. I mean, just going to gesture generally at the world all around us right now as an example of things being out of our control, whether you're looking at COVID or World War III or or whatever.
And
Uh,
uh, and yet, with all of that, the hardest thing for many of us is just getting all our groups to the table for a game. But it's something that we can, if we put our heads together, can still control. That might
mhm,
be the only thing, but there we go.
exactly. And so with Shield Maidens, what are you is there anything about the experience that you are hoping to give players and GMs who are running Shield Maidens that you think is gonna be that is unique, or just that you are highlighting and prioritizing that you really want them to take away that they may not that will stand out perhaps compared to other games that they've played?
I think with Shieldbanes, we've tried to make some genuinely interesting lore and a world that feels lived in, one that you as a player can become invested in and play a role in and just really get your teeth into. We've got a lot of history and a lot of secrets that have yet to be discovered by your characters. There's worlds to explore, and the content in the starting books is just the overview. It's just the beginning. Mechanically, we wanted a game that would be easy for new players to pick up and play, but would also provide a great deal of mechanical depth, a lot of strategy as well. But all of that is kind of built on top of a very simple and easy to grasp mechanical system. So it is expansive to play, and has an impactful style of combat. It feels heroic to play. So yeah,
Ooh,
I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm very curious. What I know you can't say too much, but what kind of dice am I gonna be rolling?
You will want at least a pair of your favorite D6s, and
Okay.
you might want to have a rather lucky D8 with you as well.
Okay, interesting.
Mhm.
Now, the Kickstarter for the Shield Maidens is launching April 1st,
On
correct?
April the 1st, yep, at
O
2 p.m. UK time.
okay, not good.
I have no
Everyone
idea
else can
what that
Google that?
no idea what that will be in the rest of the world.
Right? Well, on top of that, because by that point, daylight savings will have happened in the UK as well, whereas currently, while we're recording this, daylight savings has happened in the US, but not in the UK.
Yeah.
I almost missed this interview from not checking that. So D6s and D8s now for the Kickstarter, are there any cool extras that you're looking forward to? Like I'm a sucker for DM screens and cool maps or fold out mats or decks of cards of the spells or the items or minis, of course.
Oh,
Uh,
oh yes. We have ideas. We have quite a few really lovely little extras all lined up. Can't tell you too much about them,
okay.
but keep your eyes peeled. There will be some lovely stretch goals coming along as well.
Okay.
I
Oh,
might be
well,
working on a couple as we speak.
ooh, very exciting and tantalizing.
Mm.
So, folks, make sure to check that out. I'm also curious. So, when looking at when making this, and we've been talking about source materials you're looking at as far as lore and kind of feel of the game, and did touch on some great ones like the Norse Eddas and William Gibson. Uh, but what about did you look at other game? Were there any other game systems that you were looking at all? You know, whether like Norse or Viking style ones, or obviously like cyberpunk made a big comeback recently, like both the genre and the literal TTRPG. And of course, out of Sweden, Trudvang has been kind of making its presence known to the rest of the world over the
Yes.
past few years too. And that of course is very like immersed in Norse, like in Norse inspired and Norse lore, as well as Celtic lore too.
Hmm. I will give a quick shout out then to Eclipse Phase.
Ooh, another great game.
It really is. Yeah, absolutely lovely. One of my favorites. In terms of game like history and lore and like backstory and so on, I drew quite a bit from old classic World of Darkness as well, because I want there to be enough in the game for someone who wants to play like a shield main with an interest in history or cultures and so on. So there is a little bit from one of their games called Wraith, the Oblivion, specifically in relation to the realm of the dead, which is one of the realms you can go to. There are numerous realms that you can travel to. Somewhere along the lines of 9 of them, given that there's 9 realms, which is
Well, there's of course
happy.
going to be rumors and mysteries surrounding a supposed 10th realm.
Hmm. Possibly.
Realm X.
Can't say anything about that. And yeah, I will also shout out a video game, The Banner Saga, which I have been playing
Oh,
basically throughout the entire production. That is fine and fun and has given a few little like inspirations on things like landscapes, how the actual realms are structured in terms of
mm,
mountains, realms. So I've said realms, mountains, oceans, that kind of thing. Always nice, lots of fun. Yeah, I will shout them out as inspirations, things that you should definitely have a look at if you want to get the mood on. And if you have one of your old copies of Shadowrun lying around, you can
oh,
always try
yes.
it out as well. Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
I love Shadowrun.
mhm.
Not not a huge fan of the game system, but I love Shadowrun.
Yeah, I have played quite a few sessions of Shadowrun where you are sneaking into like corporate offices and so on, and stealing a few high-tech secrets and so on. And indeed, you can certainly run a game of Shield Maidens like that, but expect more divine powers to kind of be blowing your cover here and there. Yeah, Shield Maidens
Yeah.
can be a game with a lot of big explosions if you're not careful, or if
Well,
you are careful.
yeah, I'm not going to complain about lots of explosions in a game. It's my tastes run toward Mr. Torgs from Borderlands in that regard. I like
Mhm.
explosions, but oh, that sounds fascinating, and all great sources for people to check out as well. And I know the like we've talked about before, the World of Darkness games were groundbreaking back when they came out too, not just because of the different mechanics, but also because of their different take on RPGs and opening up that space for more people. You
Yeah,
know, it was one of the first games that was not actively gatekeeping women and queer people and was in fact openly speaking to them when it came out. Yeah. So when you're running as a player in a game, you obviously have the experience that you're looking to get out of it. What are some of the things that you tend to do to try and make sure that you're getting what you're looking for out of a game session, whether as a DM or as a player? Like I know, or as a DM, you're talking about, or as a GM, sorry, not all of us are playing D&D. As a GM, you're talking about how you have specific scenes in mind. Do you approach it the same as a player as well and try to like guide things toward those scenes? What's your approach?
can do. You certainly can play similar to that. I tend to be very story focused when I'm playing a game. I like to feel involved in the story itself. So there will be moments when I will just sit back at the table and just listen to the story quite passively. And there will be times when I want to just get very much stuck in and see what it is. Call of Cthulhu is lovely for that because it is
Hmm.
an investigative game. So the more you get stuck into it, the more you can uncover. I like finding finding additional clues and secrets in games, and that's really where I get a lot of fun. Like even if I'm playing one of the old Worlds of Darkness ones, I would play like a historian or an academic type
Mhm.
of character, because that's what I find to be the most fun. I
So
I
you
uh, I do enjoy that. Yes, I would either left on my own to make a character. I would probably make something of a mix between a college professor and Lara Croft, but possibly
Yeah.
with the
Well,
with potential
isn't
to
that
cause large explosions every now and then. So who knows?
I isn't that just Indiana Jones?
Yes, if Indiana Jones had the potential to cause more explosions,
I he does cause quite a few, but yeah,
but he
it's
is also a really, really bad archaeologist. Let's remember that.
that's true. He has fun though, and we have fun watching him, and I think that's the important thing. Is my friend Andrew Geertsen, who's a game writer for Nord Games, likes to say, "Do the dumb thing." He encourages that for players, and I definitely
That
think that's
that is
part of
mm,
yeah,
that is
being willing to make that bad choice for your character that you know is bad, but your character is like, yeah,
yep,
they would do that. Though
yep,
not, and I think a distinction that's important is that doesn't mean choosing to be a jerk. It's when it's being willing to make that choice to let bad things happen to your character because it moves the story along, or to
yep.
let them be a heel, because it moves the story, because it's good for the story and it's entertaining for everyone in that way. Not using that as a justification to, be rude or dismissive or oppressive to somebody else and their character.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. I mean, after all, you're playing a character. How many of them are going to live forever? Have fun
Hmm.
with it. That's what.
Exactly. So, what are you playing and running these days? I know you have a
Oh,
list of the games that you
no.
like to run and play on your site, but what are you actually getting to play or run these days? And I
Oh,
understand you're in the middle of writing your own game, so it might be nothing.
I work really, really, really bad hours. I am playing in one game at the moment. I know. I should be doing more. What can I say?
Oh, hey, honestly, that is one more than a lot of like writers that I know right now that are in the middle of getting products out there. So
True.
so
That is
kudos to
true.
you.
What am
But
I
seriously.
what am I playing at the moment? I am in a Call of Cthulhu game, which is probably not a big surprise. I'm almost always in a Call of
Hmm.
Cthulhu game. We are playing in the more recent Berlin set of adventures.
Ooh, fun.
They are
Those is that 30s set? I remember seeing something about that coming out, but I didn't look to see what era it's set in.
late 1920s.
Ooh, okay. Oh, perfect.
And
Well,
that is fun because I do quite like Berlin. I've been there a few times, so playing a game set in the 1920s is just yay fun. And the quality of the writing on those adventures is just top notch. I highly recommend them.
I've been everything that's been coming out for Cthulhu for the past few years, I've just been hearing rave reviews about.
Yeah.
So, and I know Green Ronin just had their big new edition, new Cthulhu game, Cthulhu Rising, right? That has been wildly popular as well. So it's
Mhm.
been nice to see that. Like I remember when nobody else knew what Cthulhu was or who H.P. Lovecraft was, except for other gamer, like a couple other gamer nerds. So you actually were talking about, like, you're like, "Oh, it's bad, I'm only playing in one game." How important do you think it is, like, seriously, for game designers or for writers to be either playing in games, or running games and then reading as well?
Reading is vital. You want to, and I'll say this to anyone who ever wants to be a writer, you have to read. That's something I know so many writers or people who want to go into writing who just don't get the time or the chance to read. You have to read if you want to write. You don't become a musician if you don't listen to music. You don't become a filmmaker if you don't watch films to see how they're made. You can't become a writer if you don't read. You have to make the time to read. For games designers, I now understand why game conventions are a thing. It's so that we can play games.
Mhm.
This is why we go to conventions. It's to play the games that we spend all year making.
Mhm. I know I've worked with Nord Games, here in the States before. They do,
Mm.
third-party 5e D&D books, but that's definitely the case with a lot of the folks that work there. Is like, they only
Yeah.
get to game regularly or they don't get to game regularly. They only get to game when they go to cons, and COVID just wrecked their gaming schedule because that was the only time they gamed.
It's so hard, it really is. Yes. It's when whenever you're working in the in a field and you're just like you spend so much time and effort just we make the games. We make
Mhm,
the games, but we all make games because we really like playing games.
mhm.
And it's just like, oh god, yes. So we will spend all year making games, and maybe occasionally, if we're really, really lucky, get to play a game as well.
It
Yeah, I'm working. Well, I co-run our local roleplay game club. So realistically, I should be playing more, or at least running games more. I did recently get to run some of the starter adventures for the One Ring, the
Ooh,
new edition,
yeah,
and that is a lovely game, and that was very, very easy to run and an absolute joy to do so as well. The starter set I'll recommend because it is set entirely within Hobbiton. No, it's not set within Hobbiton. It's set within the Shire, and
mhm.
all of the players play as hobbits.
Oh,
And
perfect.
yes, it is lovely.
I
So I ran that fairly recently, and we are hoping to get our local Pathfinder lodge back up and running as well, so we can do a couple of their living campaigns as well.
And think Edge Studios that makes the Star Wars RPG should take a note. If you're gonna put out a new Star Wars starter set, everyone should be a Baby Yoda.
Oh
Like,
yes,
just
absolutely.
I mean, look at Paizo. All their, like, free RPG Day starter stuff, for Pathfinder, you play goblins, and if it's
Hmm.
Starfinder, you're Skittermanders.
Yes.
It's cute mascot. You gotta go with a cute mascot. And honestly, actually, that's a friend of mine who teaches a Dungeons and Dragons class at the high school he teaches at. Advice he gave to me when I was going to start running for some kids was like, they're going to want all the pets,
Mm,
and that's
yeah.
very true. People, gamers in general, they love to get pets. They love having a cute NPC or a cute pet monster or something like that.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
uh,
If you
so
have
I'm get are there familiars or some such in Shield Maidens?
You do have the option. I have written rules for such. Yes, you can certainly adopt animals as companions and bring them into battle with
Yeah.
yourself.
So if a cute mascot's not decided on yet, because say Freya had a sleigh pulled by giant cats,
That's
so
true.
even cats are just. I was almost late to this interview today because the neighbor's cat was just plopped down to the front door when I went out to run errands, and I lost half an hour to that. So getting back on the topic of DMing, you also have been doing professional DMing or paid game mastering in addition to running for the club that you're a part of.
Oh, that was
How
a
did
long time ago.
Oh, well, I was kinda curious, what was that experience like for you?
That was a long time ago. I just don't have the time to do it anymore. No, I that is one of the things post lockdown I've had to sadly say goodbye to. I'm afraid.
Mm, mm.
Mm,
Well, and, so you were doing it was it in-person games that you were
yeah.
mostly, doing that before? Okay. Yeah, and I feel you there because I have done some professional game mastering as well, and I prefer to do it in person
Mm,
because I feel like people feel like they're getting their money's worth a lot more than because you're able to bring the experience to them and kinda give them that full gaming experience. I can bust out a bunch of minis and maps and stuff, and it looks like and feels like D&D. When people
mm,
are doing it on their computer, they just don't value it to the same degree. Like, I
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. I know that just what like, the going rates, like, I work with, an online, with startplaying.games, which is like Airbnb for dungeon masters, if you ever need to hire someone to run a game for you, but in-person games, I get paid 4 or 5 times as much as like, the going rate is 4 to 5 times as much as it is for running a game online on, like, Roll20 or another, VTT
Yeah.
platform. Yeah. Well, hopefully that's something that hopefully you get to do more gaming as we come out of
Yeah.
COVID. I don't wanna
Well,
say
so
speculate on when that'll be.
we are hoping so. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you're able to kind of get over the hump with Shield Maidens, hopefully you'll get to actually play it and other games some more as well.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
we have been doing quite a few girl tests of it to get it all up and running. So yeah, we'll be getting hopefully the chance to bring it to a few conventions around the country as we can.
oh, fantastic, fantastic. And now you're based in the UK. You're working with Mongoose. I honestly don't know. Are they a UK or US based company?
Mongoose are UK.
Okay, okay. So probably doing the imagining doing like the
Mm,
UK and European con scene though.
yeah,
Uh,
as best we can.
mhm. So, are there any other places online that, or any other things that you're working on that I should be pointing people to?
You can point them to the easiest way for people to get in touch with me would be via Twitter, which is Alison Cybe, just usual one. I have also been working on Star Rollers, the Starfinder Society podcast. We are currently in production of season 3, so
Ooh,
keep an eye open for that. It will be
and
out later this year.
are you guys continuing to run through Pathfinder Society adventures for that?
We're doing Starfinder
Or
Society.
Starfinder,
Yeah.
sorry, Starfinder Society adventures.
We might very well be looking at Pathfinder at some point as well. It's always possible.
But but you've been using the Starfinder Society adventures as opposed to
Yeah,
homebrew or like the larger adventure paths.
yeah. We want to give the players the listeners a chance to hear how the society campaigns work. So
Awesome.
you can tune in and hear how it goes and see how they rock.
And link is in the show notes, folks, assuming I've done my job.
Mhm.
And so I have one last question for you. What do you wish I had asked you, and how would you have answered?
Oh, I don't know. What do I wish that you had asked me? I don't know. Is there anything else you would like to ask?
I mean,
My,
I have a big list of questions and we can go on, but this seems like a good point for us to wrap up. But definitely would like to have you on as a guest in the future. And when this is, I should have this out about the same time that the Shield Maidens Kickstarter campaign is running. So everyone, be sure to check that out. I recommend backing it. It's got all kinds of awesome extra stuff when you up your pledge and you want to unlock those stretch goals, which I'm very excited about, even if I don't know what they are right now.
yeah, they are currently secret, but yes, you'll get the chance to. You could ask me what happens when you roll a d8 in Shield Maidens, if you like.
Okay, what happens when you roll a d8 in Shield Maidens?
Hopefully, good things.
Explosions.
It might be explosions.
Okay, I'm excited.
Yes, we might have some very special dice queued up for one of these stretch
Ooh.
goals.
Ooh.
And a whole bunch of other things. We have had some feedback for players who are thinking, you play as Shield Maidens. Can you play as male characters as well? That will be as part of the stretch goals too. We have allies and heroes as well that will be available if you back the game, and it will all kind of come together to be part of this big, vibrant franchise world. I say franchise. That sounds dreadful. There will be it will be a world that you'll be able to get your
Yeah.
teeth stuck into. We have ideas just
Uh,
going off into the future with it.
I get what you mean by I mean, again, I'm in marketing, so I'm like, oh, franchise is like, yes, but I understand what you mean. Like, it's meant to be an expansive world. It's meant to be like there's a lot more of it out there, and you are leaving yourselves that space and
Yep.
GMs and players that space to be able to expand in so many different directions, in whatever direction that you want to take it. At least that's how I take what you're saying.
By the time this podcast goes up, I'll be working on a short story fiction piece for the game, which is titled
Ooh.
"The Day I Punched Thor's Son in the Face."
Oh, I love it already. Okay, well, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up here. Folks, make sure to check out Allison's work both on the Shield Maidens Kickstarter as well as some of their books that you can find online. And Realms of Valoron is available right now, and as is I Was a Gay Teenage Zombie, if you want to reach back a bit and read Allison's earlier work. And of course, make sure to check out their site at cybeswebsite.com, CYBES website.com, or Alison Cybe on Twitter.
I
Well, thanks so
promise.
much.
I promise I will update the website at some point during the year.
Hey, that's good enough for me. Okay,
Thank
well,
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
for inviting
much.
me on. It has